my name is Nick Harris, and in this video I'd like to show you how you can authenticate and authorize users of your Windows Store apps using Windows Azure Mobile Services. Now, the first piece, authentication, we can do that in mobile services using Microsoft account, Facebook, Twitter, or Google. But once your user's authenticated, you may want to implement certain authorization policies. So one particular example would be you only want authenticated users to see their own data from the mobile service. So we can implement these authorization policies using server-side scripts. So let's cut across to the portal and have a look how we can both authenticate and authorize our users. So I'm in the portal now. First thing we're going to do is to create a new mobile service. New, compute, mobile service, create. And I'm going to call this an auth demo. Now, in this particular case, I've already got an existing SQL database, so I'm going to use my existing SQL database. If you didn't have an existing DB, you could just simply select Create New SQL Database Instance. I'm going to deploy to the East US region, and we're going to continue on and provide credentials for my existing database here. Hit complete, and now it's going off and provisioning our auth demo mobile service. So this will only take a few seconds. Great, we're done. So now let's step into auth demo. So the first thing that I want to do is I want to create a table, and this table is essentially going to store my data for my mobile service. Now, when my client application tries to perform any of the CRUD operations, insert, update, delete, or reads, I can specify what permissions I want on those operations individually. In this case, I only want authenticated users to be able to say insert, update, delete, or read from this to-do item table. So I can set that permission there like that, hit save. Right, so now that table's locked down and no one can use it unless they're authenticated. Now, to configure which authentication option that I want my client applications to be able to use, I can use the Identity tab. And within here you can see we have Microsoft account, Facebook, Twitter, and Google as options. I'm going to configure my Microsoft account, and to do that we can use the live portal. So that is at manage.dev.live.com. So we can go there and we can register our application. I'm going to call it auth demo and hit I accept. So the first thing that we get back are our credentials for mobile services. So this is our client ID. You can go to the portal here, paste in the client ID, and now we can go back and select the client secret and drop that into the portal as well and hit save. So now that our changes are saved, what we need to do is the last step of creating this application within our Live Developer Connect portal. And what that last step is essentially to provide the redirect domain, which is our mobile service required for the authentication flow to be successful. So to get that URL, it's basically auth-demo at azure-mobile.net. You can grab it from the dashboard tab here by simply selecting it, copying it, and pasting it back over and hitting save. So now our auth flow is ready to go. So let's get started on the client application piece. Going to select the quick start and use the to-do item demo. I've already installed the Mobile Services SDK. We just created the to-do item table through the portal, and we set the permissions to require only authenticated users. So we can simply download this app and start it, running it. So I'll save this. Open that. I'll extract this out. Now, this is our client application, and because we've specified that the to-do item table requires authenticated users to be able to perform an operation, at the current point in time, our application doesn't do the auth piece. So it should get an unauthorized error when we run it. So let's run it, and the first operation that this application does is try to get the list of items back from the server. So right now it's hitting our mobile service, and it tried to read the to-do table, and it got back an unauthorized. So essentially what we need to do here is implement that authorization step. So let's do that. So what I'd like to do is in the main page, when I navigate to this, when I navigate to it, that's where we refresh our items. So I'd actually like to authenticate before I try to refresh the items each time I navigate to this page. And we can do that like this. We can say this is going to be an async method. We can say await and authenticate method, which we're going to author. And we'll just write that here. Public async. We're going to use system.threading.task.task, and we'll call this authenticate. So to authenticate using mobile services, it's as simple as going await app.mobileservice, which is an instance of our mobile services client, login async, and then we provide in the provider that we configured in the portal. In this case, we configured Microsoft account. So with that, if we run this, you'll see that already we're able to log in with our Microsoft account. Sign in. It's asking if we allow this app to have access to our data. Hit yes. There we go. So you can see there's no exception now, and we can start adding items to the list. Great. So that's our authentication done. But you may want to go and take this a slight bit further. You may want to handle the case where the user doesn't authenticate successfully. So let's do that. Say try. Valid operation exception. Right, and within this, we're also going to say while the user is not authenticated, so we'll say app.mobileservice.current_user is equal to null. We want to keep trying to authenticate. Great, so that's now continue authenticating until we've got an authenticated user. Perhaps in this catch dialog, or the catch operation here, we're going to pop up a dialog to say that the user didn't authenticate successfully. So let's do this. Let's say string message, and within here we'll say message is equal to user authenticated, and then we can perhaps use a string.format to do something like app.mobileservice.current_user.user_ID. So that will be the user ID from our identity provider. And here we can say message login unsuccessful. The last thing we can do is use a message dialog to essentially show this message. So let's say bar dialog is equal to new message dialog, resolve this reference, and we can put our content in there as message. We'll say login status, and then we just simply say wait dialog.show async. So let's run this again. In this case, let's hit back and just say login status is now unsuccessful. Okay, so it tries to get us to do it again. So let's do it correctly this time. Sign in. Now you can see our user is authenticated, and we've got the actual user ID passed back, which is after this colon here. So that's a unique identifier for our user. So now that we've got the authentication piece done, let's have a look how we can authorize our users to only see their own data. I'm going to hit close on this. Now, within our data option here, we've got our table and we've got script. So now that our user is authenticated, on our insert operations, updates, deletes and reads, we'll have this user parameter. Now the user parameter is essentially the authenticated user. So I can do this, I can say item.userid is equal to user.userid. So in this case, I'm adding a new column called userid to the table, and its value is going to be the same as we showed in the pop-up dialog before, and that is the Microsoft account user ID. So if I save this now, every time I insert an item within my to-do list, it'll now have a user ID property. So now let's go to the authorization piece. I only want users to be able to see or read their own data back. So to do this, it's quite straightforward. We can say query dot where to add a where condition. We can simply say user ID is equal to user.user ID, and that will filter the returned result set to return only those items for the logged in user. So let's save this and we can actually go and test this now. So let's run our client application. Now in this scenario, I'm going to use two separate accounts. The first one is nh.azure. So you'll note that the difference between the two will be this dot. And let's log in for this. So we'll sign in. You can see we're authenticated. And we can say, so that's going to be our account 1 task. So let's stop this and rerun the client application. And this time we're going to log in with our second account, nh.azure, which has no dot, at hotmail.com. We'll sign in and we'll allow this one to have access to our data, which is what we did with the other one previously already. And now we've got our different authenticated user ID because we essentially used two different Hotmail accounts. So I'll call this one nhazure@hotmail.com. I'll hit save. Now if you see, I'm hitting refresh, which is hitting the where query or the read query, and that where clause is actually implementing correctly to only return back our data. So we can see this by going to the portal and hitting browse. You'll see that we actually do have a number of items in here now, but we're only filtering now based on that authorization policy we defined, which is return back the user only their data based on user ID. And that's it. That's how you can both authenticate and authorize your users using Windows Azure Mobile Services.